Senator Joel.
Ms. Pacey, I would want to come back to the issue of the constitutionality of some sections of the bills, the one that, of course, deals with the objectives of the Bedford decision, which is essentially to increase the security of prostitutes. We have heard this morning the government arguing that the bill creates a different context because the bill recognized, or I should say the preamble of the bill recognized, that women are victims of prostitution, that the prostitution is essentially a phenomenon of victimization. And if you read the preamble, it speaks of exploitation, commodification, a disproportionate impact on women and children. Won't you be challenged on the basis that it might be a breach to Section 7, which is the security of the person, but it's saved by Section 1 of the Charter, which is limits that are reasonable in a free and democratic society, the objective being to fight for non-exploitation of women, non-commodification of women, and so forth. How will you rebut that argument from the government in court if you find yourself in that position on challenging the section of this bill that deals with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
Mm-hmm. It's a big question. My simple answer is this. I believe the evidence is going to speak for itself. I believe that the impact on the ground, especially as it relates to the clients that we work with, the community of sex workers that Pivot is part of, working in the downtown east side of Vancouver, and of course that's our focus and that's who we will likely represent on a going forward basis. The reality for them, as it was with the Bedford case and in the Suave decision, was so egregious. The conditions created by the laws was so appalling and so unjustifiable that in the context of Bedford and Suave, where we were dealing with different legislative objectives, in my view, the outcome was clear. In this case, we're dealing with different objectives, and that balancing exercise, when we're talking about principles of fundamental justice, we will be having a different conversation at the court. But my simple answer for you today is that the harms are going to be so tragic because the conditions will remain as they are under the existing laws, and what is awful to imagine is that sex workers will be placed in the circumstance of again having to withstand those conditions and circumstances and again have to go back to court demanding their rights.
Thank you.
Senator Johnson.
I had earlier asked you about the report that you had prepared and we ran out of time. Can you talk about why you prepared that report and what were the findings of the report that you prepared with the HIV/AIDS organization?
So the purpose of that report, I mean, we are in an ongoing dialogue with the Vancouver Police Department and with the province of British Columbia and the city of Vancouver at all times about safety in our community. That is a conversation that was prompted by the tragedy that we've seen in Vancouver and the experience of the past 15 years with Canada's largest serial killer. That conversation is ongoing, and I'm happy to say that partners are coming to the table, including police, including municipalities, and members of the province are coming forward really with an invested interest, really wanting to know the best way forward. So that report was created and that research took place to genuinely ask the question, if the police shift their enforcement practices, if they lift the pressures of enforcement away from sex workers, if they redirect that towards their clients, what does that mean for sex workers on the street? And sex workers were very interested in having their voices heard. So the BC Centre for Excellence, because they're research experts, carried out the qualitative work of going out, talking to sex workers and asking them about the circumstances of their work and how it is for them ever since this policy shift took place. They then conducted the data analysis because that's what they do so well. We then conducted the legal analysis to follow, and the results show very clearly the conditions remain the same with enforcement having shifted as they were under the communicating law. And a story that I will just share with you briefly is that sex workers explained that they may be standing in more well-lit locations now because they feel like the police aren't going to arrest them, but their clients drive up, they barely slow down, and they start to point to the dark alley around the corner. That is where the client is willing to stop. She then follows the client into that alley. That is where he suggests she gets into the car as quickly as possible before they're detected by police. She's in the car then, and that's where the negotiation takes place, where she has complete major loss of control over the conditions. And those are the exact conditions that we are trying to confront while being invested in supporting the sex workers in that community to have all the options and all the choices. And we're fighting for housing, and we're fighting for welfare, and we're fighting for health services, and we're fighting for all of those things. We want the women that we work with to be alive to enjoy those benefits if they arrive one day.
Thank you. We've reached the conclusion of the time allotted, and we thank you all for being here today and contributing to the committee's deliberations on this important piece of legislation. Thank you all. We will suspend briefly, members, and reconvene at 4:15.